Welcome to Nightward Echo, a place where the waves hide more than they reveal, and every ripple carries a story you were never meant to hear. Tonight we're diving into 10 true and creepy cruise ship horror stories, tales that will make you think twice before your next vacation at sea. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? And don't forget to subscribe. This month we're aiming for 500 subscribers, and your click brings us one step closer. Just remember, once the echoes of the deep reach you, there's no turning back. I work as a part-time travel photographer, which means I take odd jobs just to fund my trips. Last September, I booked a budget cruise out of Miami to cover a small story about off-season Caribbean travel. The cruise line was one of those no-frills companies that mostly attracted older couples, budget travelers, and a few students trying to squeeze in a cheap vacation. I wasn't expecting anything memorable. I figured I'd spend a few days shooting sunsets, writing notes, and maybe getting a few candid shots of passengers for my portfolio. But that trip still keeps me awake at night because of a man we all saw, who was never really there. The hook the first night on board was chaotic but normal for a cruise. Hundreds of passengers crowding the decks, luggage rolling everywhere. The usual confusion about cabin numbers. Around 6 p.m., we had the mandatory safety drill. The crew herded us to the muster stations on the lower deck to show us the lifeboats and explain the evacuation routine. I was standing near the middle of my group, next to a married couple from Michigan and a college kid in a bucket hat. That's when I noticed him. He was hard to miss, tall, maybe 6'4", with a wiry frame. He wore an old-fashioned red windbreaker, faded like it had been through decades of sun and salt. His face was pale and thin, his hair short and dark. What stood out most was the way he stood, ramrod straight, almost too still, like he was bracing against a wind that wasn't there. I only noticed him because he didn't seem to move when the rest of us shuffled forward. When I glanced back again, I caught his eyes for a second, dark, fixed on me, or maybe on nothing at all. I looked away quickly because there was something off about the way he stared. During the drill, the crew member called for us to raise our boarding passes for roll call. That's when I realized the man in the red jacket wasn't holding anything. He just stood there slightly apart from the group. After the drill ended, we were guided back to our decks. I lost sight of him in the crowd. I didn't think much of it. Plenty of awkward loners travel on cruises. The build-up that night, at dinner in the main buffet, I sat with a few passengers I'd met during boarding. Sarah, a middle-aged nurse on her first vacation in years. Greg and Melissa, the couple from Michigan. And Kevin, the college kid. We made small talk about the storm clouds on the horizon and the ship's slightly dated decor. Somewhere in the conversation, Sarah mentioned something that made my stomach drop. "Did anyone notice that really tall guy in the red jacket during the safety drill?" she asked. "He looked so, I don't know, out of place," Greg chuckled. "Yeah, he was like a lighthouse. Couldn't miss him," Kevin chimed in. "Yeah, I swear he never blinked." Melissa shivered slightly. "I looked for him in the dining hall just now. Didn't see him anywhere." We all laughed it off as just some weird loner, but the fact that we all noticed him stuck with me. Later that evening, around 11 p.m., I went out to the observation deck to get some shots of the dark ocean. The deck was mostly empty except for a few smokers huddled near the back. While I was adjusting my camera, I caught a glimpse of movement at the far end of the deck. A tall figure leaned against the railing, staring out to sea. The red jacket. I hesitated, half thinking I should approach and ask for a portrait shot. Photographers can be shameless like that. But there was something about the way he stood so still, not even shifting his weight, that made me feel like I'd be intruding. I turned to check my camera settings. When I glanced up again less than a minute later, he was gone. The deck was empty all the way to the railing. I told myself he'd just gone inside quietly. Ships are big. People vanish into them all the time. Growing unease, the next morning at breakfast, I asked one of the crew, a young Filipino steward named Marco, if he knew the passenger in the red jacket. Marco frowned. "Red jacket? I don't think so, sir. Most passengers checked in last night. We have their cabin numbers. Maybe I can ask my supervisor." Later that afternoon, Marco found me by the pool. He looked unsettled. "Sir, I checked the list. No one like that. I even checked with security. They don't have any camera footage of someone in a red jacket boarding yesterday. That didn't make sense. We'd all seen him during the drill. He'd been standing right there with us. That night at dinner, the topic came up again. Kevin said he'd thought he saw the man on the deck around dawn, just standing by the lifeboats. Sarah said she'd woken up in the middle of the night and thought she saw a tall figure standing by the rail outside her cabin window. But they were on the 6th deck, and there's no walkway there. We laughed nervously, but I noticed Melissa's hands tremble slightly as she cut her steak. The first incident on the 3rd day, the ship hit a patch of rough sea. Most people stayed in their cabins or lounged in the indoor cafe. I was in the cafe editing photos when an announcement came over the PA asking for a passenger named Andrew Keller to report to the purser's desk. The name didn't mean anything to me until I overheard a couple at the next table whispering that Keller was a solo traveler, a young guy who hadn't been seen since the night before. That evening, we learned through the grapevine that the ship's crew was quietly searching for him. His cabin was empty. His luggage and wallet were still inside. I don't know why, but I immediately thought of the man in the red jacket, the climax. The real horror hit on the 4th night. The sea had calmed, and there was a quiet, almost eerie stillness to the ship. I went back to the observation deck around midnight to try some long exposure shots. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. Halfway through a 30-second exposure, I sensed someone standing behind me. I turned around fast, and there he was. The red-jacketed man stood less than 6 feet away. In the dim deck light, his face looked almost gray, his lips pale. His eyes, and dark and hollow, weren't looking at me but past me, as if staring at something far out over the water. I opened my mouth to say something, but before I could speak, he turned and started walking toward the edge of the deck, except, and I swear this is true, it didn't look like he was walking on the deck. His steps were strangely slow, almost gliding, his feet barely making a sound. He reached the railing and stopped. I took one cautious step closer, trying to say, "Hey, are you okay?" The man tilted his head as if he heard me. Then he leaned forward, not climbing, not stepping, just leaning further and further until his entire upper body tipped over the railing. I rushed forward in shock. But when I reached the railing and looked down at the black water, there was nothing. No splash, no movement. The sea was calm as glass. A second later, I heard the metallic click of the door behind me. I spun around. The deck was empty. The aftermath, I barely slept that night. The next morning, there was a tense buzz among the passengers. Rumors spread fast. Another man, an older passenger this time, had apparently gone missing overnight. His cabin door was found unlocked, lights still on, bed unused. Sarah cornered me at breakfast. "You saw him, didn't you? Last night. The man in the red jacket." I nodded. My mouth was too dry to explain what I'd seen. The ship's captain made an announcement later that day, downplaying the incidents as unconfirmed reports of missing persons, and assuring everyone that authorities would investigate once we docked. But the mood on board turned grim. People stuck close to their cabins after dark. On the last night of the cruise, I sat in the lounge with Greg and Melissa. None of us said it out loud, but we all kept glancing at the door, half expecting to see that tall, thin figure stroll in. The ending, when we finally docked back in Miami, the crew made one last head count as passengers disembarked. I overheard an officer say something that chilled me. "The count's off by 1. Again. We never learned what that meant. Weeks later, I checked the news for follow-ups on the missing passengers. Nothing. No headlines. No investigations. It was as if they'd never been on board. Sometimes I go back to my camera's memory card from that night. One of the long exposure shots, a blurred image of the dark sea, has a faint, almost imperceptible figure near the railing. A streak of red against the darkness. I tell myself it's just a lens flare. I have to. But sometimes late at night I dream of standing on that deck again. The sea so calm it feels like glass. And seeing that tall, silent figure leaning over the railing, staring at something in the water. That cruise was supposed to be a routine assignment. Instead, I came back with fewer photos than ever, and a memory I'll never shake of the passenger who never boarded. I don't usually share stuff like this online, but I can't stop thinking about what happened. I booked a last-minute winter getaway to a small mountain lodge in northern Colorado earlier this year. I wanted some peace after a rough breakup. Just a few days of quiet hiking, reading by the fireplace, and being far from my phone. The lodge wasn't fancy. It had a long, creaky wooden hallway with about 30 rooms, all numbered in brass plaques. The air smelled faintly of pine and old varnish. The kind of place that feels cozy in daylight but strangely hollow at night. I didn't think anything of it until I checked in, and the woman at the front desk, a thin, older lady named Meredith, hesitated when she handed me my key. "You're in cabin 304, she said after a pause, like she had to convince herself to say it. "We've just had it cleaned. Should be fine." I didn't ask why she said it like that. The setup, the cabin was at the far end of the upstairs hallway. The door was stiff to push open, the way doors in old buildings sometimes are. Inside was simple. A twin bed, a dresser, a little writing desk under a small window that overlooked the dark tree line. There was a faint draft that made the curtains sway even with the window shut. The first night was uneventful. I was unpacking and texting my best friend Mark about the trip. By 11 p.m., the whole lodge was quiet except for the faint hum of the heating system. I remember falling asleep to the sound of wind slipping through the pine trees outside. The first whisper at around 3 a.m., I woke up. Not because of a nightmare, just that strange feeling that someone's in the room with you. I stayed very still, eyes half open, and that's when I heard it. "You're awake." It was soft, a whisper that seemed to come from right next to my bed. The hairs on my arms rose instantly. I turned on the lamp. No one was there. I told myself I'd dreamed it. The lodge was old. Maybe the heater made weird noises. Still, it took me almost an hour to fall asleep again. Meeting the others, the next morning I went downstairs for coffee. 2 other guests, a middle-aged couple named Karen and Joe, were sitting at the breakfast table near the fireplace. We got to talking about the hiking trails and the snowstorm forecast for the weekend. Karen asked which room I was in. 304, I said. Both of them looked at each other for a second. Then Joe asked, half joking but with an edge in his voice, "Did you sleep okay?" I hesitated. "I think so." "Why?" Karen gave a small nervous laugh. "We stayed there last year. Heard weird things at night. Thought it was the wind at first." Before I could press them for details, Meredith came in with a tray of muffins and the couple went quiet. Things get weirder. The second night, I left the lamp on. I also put my phone on record and left it on the nightstand, just to see if it would pick up anything while I slept. At around 2:30 a.m., I woke up again. This time I heard the whisper clearly. "Why did you come back?" It sounded like a woman's voice. Faint, like it came through cupped hands, but it was inside the room. I sat up and said out loud, "Who's there?" No response. I played the recording the next morning. All I heard was my own breathing and the occasional creak of the building. No whisper. That day I ran into Karen and Joe again. I told them I'd heard a whisper. Joe nodded slowly and said, "Did it say your name yet?" The way he asked that made my stomach sink. The third night I didn't want to sleep in that room again, but the lodge was fully booked because of the snowstorm. By nightfall, the wind outside had picked up, rattling the window. Around 1:45 a.m., I heard it again. Closer this time, almost at my ear. Evan, that's my name. I swear I hadn't told anyone in the lodge except at check-in. I froze. The room was dark except for the pale blue light of the moon on the curtains. I could hear the faintest sound, like someone's lips brushing the edge of my pillow as they whispered again. "Don't stay!" I bolted out of bed, turned on the lamp, and checked every corner, even under the bed. Nothing. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Looking for answers, the next morning, I went straight to Meredith at the front desk. I told her everything. She gave me a long, tired look and said quietly, "You're not the first. Some say it's just the draft or the old vents carrying voices. Others, well, there was a woman who used to stay here years ago. She always asked for that cabin. She died here. Heart failure, they said. But she'd checked in under a different name. We never learned her real one. That didn't exactly comfort me. I asked to switch rooms, but the storm had blocked the highway and there were no openings anywhere. The last night, I decided I'd sleep with my phone flashlight on and my boots near the bed. I planned to leave as soon as the sun came up. At some point during the night, I drifted off. I don't know what time it was when I woke up to the sound of the whisper again, but this time it was all around me, like it was coming from the walls. "Evan, you shouldn't be here. Leave." I scrambled for my phone, but it had shut off. Dead battery even though I'd charged it. The lamp flickered twice and then went dark. In the dim glow of moonlight, I saw something move in the corner by the desk. Not a clear figure, more like a darker patch of shadow that didn't belong there. I grabbed my coat, flung the door open, and ran barefoot down the hallway. The old boards groaned under my steps. I didn't stop until I was in the lobby, shivering and out of breath. Meredith was sitting behind the desk as if she'd been waiting. She didn't ask what happened. She just handed me a blanket and said, "Stay down here. You'll be safe enough." Aftermath. The storm cleared the next afternoon. I left without going back upstairs for the rest of my things. The staff mailed them to me later. When I checked the audio file, I'd recorded that final night about 4 hours long. Most of it was silence. But near the end, just before the battery died, there was a faint whisper. It said as clear as if someone leaned into the mic, "Evan, you heard me. Don't come back." I haven't. Sometimes late at night, I think I hear that same whisper just as I'm falling asleep. But I live over 1,000 miles away now, and I never told anyone in the lodge my last name. I worked as a night shift deckhand on a cruise ship for nearly 6 years. I'd seen my share of strange stuff on the water, fog that came out of nowhere, phantom lights on distant waves, even a couple of medical emergencies that ended badly. But nothing ever shook me the way the thing on Deck 14 did. I'm sharing this because I can't sleep at night anymore. I hear the sea outside my window and it brings everything back. The Hook, a normal night. This happened 3 years ago. We were about 2 days out from Miami, headed toward the Bahamas. It was early spring, but a storm system had rolled in that evening. The sea was choppy, wind biting cold, sky like a sheet of black slate. Most of the passengers were asleep or holed up in the lounges. I had the late watch from midnight to 4 a.m. My job was mostly routine. Patrol the exterior decks, make sure the doors were secure, check that no drunk passengers wandered too close to the rail. The ship had cameras everywhere, but we still did physical rounds because things get missed on screens. There were 3 of us on night watch that trip. Me, Mark, an older crewman who'd been at sea for decades, and a rookie named Elias. We rotated between lower decks and upper promenade. That night I had the mid-levels, Elias the lower decks, and Mark volunteered for the uppermost open deck. Deck 14, the observation deck. It's usually closed at night during rough weather. At around 1:15 a.m., I was walking past the lounge windows when my radio crackled. Ryan," Mark's voice came through. "You near the security station?" I said I was about to loop back. "Good, check the camera for Deck 14, I think there's someone up here." I stopped walking. I thought that deck was locked. "It is," he said, voice low and hesitant. "But I'm looking at a guy pacing along the rail." The build-up. First sight. The security station was just a few doors down. I jogged inside and pulled up the feed for the top deck. At first all I saw was darkness and rain streaks glinting in the floodlights. Then in the far right corner of the camera, a figure drifted into view. He was thin, so thin he looked stretched, and he moved with a strange rhythm. He would walk 6 steps toward the bow, stop, turn, and walk 6 steps back, over and over. His arms hung stiffly at his sides. The wind lashed his shirt against his body, but he didn't hunch or brace himself like you normally would. He just paced. I told Mark I saw him. I also checked the door access logs. Deck 14's hatch hadn't been opened since we secured it at 10 p.m. "You sure it's not a passenger who slipped up before you locked it?" I asked. "No," Mark replied. "I locked it myself. Could be a crewman who stayed behind." "Ryan," Mark's voice dropped to a whisper. His feet aren't making a sound. That gave me goosebumps. The observation deck was metal. In heavy boots, you'd hear clunks even through the radio. I switched the camera to infrared. The man's body gave off almost no heat, just a dim outline. It wasn't a camera glitch. The rain and railings showed up clear and bright. The decision to investigate, I called Elias over the radio to meet me at the stairwell below Deck 14. Mark stayed on the deck, keeping an eye on the figure from a safe distance. We moved fast. The storm outside roared around the ship, but inside the stairwell it was eerily silent, just the hum of engines below. We reached the heavy security door leading to the top deck. It was still locked. I swiped my keycard, light turned green, latch clicked. Mark came on the radio, sounding shaken. He stopped pacing. "He's just standing by the bow now, like he's waiting." We opened the door and stepped out into the freezing rain. The observation deck was slick and empty, floodlights casting long white streaks across wet metal. Wind pushed the rain sideways, stinging my face. No one was there. Mark joined us a moment later from the far side. He swore the man had been there less than 30 seconds ago. We checked every corner, even behind the storage lockers. Nothing. And the only way down was through the locked door we came from. We all exchanged looks, but didn't say the word out loud. Stranger events. Went back to the security station, half thinking it had been some optical illusion. When we replayed the camera feed, the figure was gone, completely gone. The footage glitched and skipped about 5 seconds, right after Mark said the man had stopped pacing. No static, no blur, just a clean jump in time. That alone was creepy enough, but it didn't end there. Around 3 a.m., while I was doing another patrol on the mid-decks, I saw a wet footprint on the carpeted hallway leading to the lounge. Barefoot, long, thin. One print, then nothing else. No trail. Elias reported hearing someone walking above him on the sealed observation deck an hour later. He radioed us, but when we checked, there was still no one there. By sunrise, the storm eased. We were exhausted and Mark looked the worst. He kept muttering about how he'd seen the man's face for a split second. Grayish, hollow-eyed, mouth slightly open as if whispering. Climax. The second night. We thought that was the end of it. The next night the sea was calmer, but the captain still kept the top deck closed due to high winds. At about 2 a.m., the alarms for the upper hatch triggered in the security station. The door had been opened. We rushed up the stairwell expecting a stowaway or drunk passenger. The door to deck 14 was ajar, swinging in the wind. The padlock was still in place, dangling from the latch, unbroken. This time, when we stepped onto the deck, we all heard it. Footsteps. Slow, measured, coming from the far end. But no one was there. The sound moved closer, each step ringing on the metal floor, splashing faintly in the rain puddles. We backed toward the hatch, my flashlight beam shaking as I tried to catch whatever was walking toward us. Suddenly, the pacing stopped. A whisper carried on the wind, faint but distinct. Still here. The floodlights flickered. For a split second, just a blink, I saw him. The man stood on the rail at the bow, leaning forward as if he were about to dive into the black water. His eyes caught the light, dull, lifeless. His mouth moved, but I couldn't hear the words. Then he was gone. Resolution. Aftermath. We reported everything to the chief of security. He listened, but didn't believe us. He said the storm and lack of sleep had us seeing things. The captain ordered the cameras checked. No glitches found. No recordings of the man on the rail. Not even the footprints. Mark quit after that trip. Said he wasn't setting foot on a ship again. Elias lasted 2 more voyages before transferring to a land-based job. I stayed, but I changed. Every time I'm on night watch and the sea gets rough, I find myself staring at the feed for Deck 14. I can't help it. A few months later, I talked to an older crewman who'd been with the line for decades. When I described what we'd seen, his face went pale. He said there was a story, just a rumor, that back in the 80s, a young passenger had disappeared from that very deck during a storm. Last seen pacing by the rail. I don't know if that's true or just sailor gossip, but I do know what I saw. And every night I'm out at sea, I listen for footsteps above me, keeping rhythm with the waves. 6 steps forward, 6 steps back. To anyone reading this, if you ever work night shift on a cruise ship and hear footsteps pacing the deck above you during a storm, don't go looking, because if he's still out there, I don't think he wants to be found. I work as a night shift maintenance guy on one of those older cruise liners that mostly do short, cheap trips around the Caribbean. The ship itself is over 40 years old, and while it's been renovated a few times, there are still whole sections that look straight out of the 70s. There's one part of the ship we don't talk about much. The older crew call it the locked ballroom. It's on Deck 3, down a narrow corridor that smells faintly of rust and mildew. If you didn't know it was there, you'd walk right past it. The double doors are big, with ornate brass handles and a faded Grand Horizon Ballroom sign above them. But the handles have been removed and a thick metal strip has been welded across the seam where the doors meet. It's as if someone wanted to make absolutely sure nobody ever stepped inside again. The official story, if you ask management, is that the room was sealed decades ago because of structural damage. Something about water leaking during a storm and rotting the floor supports. But ask any of the older deckhands, and they'll tell you something different. They'll lower their voice and say, "That room's wrong. Should have been torn out with the rest of the old deck, but they couldn't. We just sealed it up." I didn't believe any of that when I started. I figured it was just one of those ship legends meant to scare new guys. The first time I really thought twice about it was about a month into the job. I was walking my usual midnight rounds with Jorge, an older Filipino maintenance tech who'd been with the company 25 years. We just checked the cold storage room and were heading back when we passed that sealed door. Jorge slowed down a little, his eyes sliding toward the door as we passed. I teased him, "You still afraid of that ballroom?" He just shook his head. "Not afraid," he muttered, "but you never stop feeling it. Like someone's listening from the other side." I laughed it off. But that night, after I'd gone to bed in my cabin, I dreamed I heard faint music, slow waltz music, coming from somewhere far below me. I chalked it up to imagination. A week later, I got put on solo patrol because Jorge was sick. Walking the ship alone at night feels different. The corridors echo, the ventilation hums in your ears, and every so often you hear a thump or a soft creak from the hull as the ship shifts in the waves. That night, as I passed the locked ballroom, I stopped without meaning to. There was a sound, faint but there. I turned off my flashlight for a second and just listened. It was like distant laughter. It wasn't cheerful. It was muffled, as if it were coming through heavy walls. I stood there for a good 30 seconds thinking maybe there were passengers drunk and lost on the lower decks. But nobody should have been down there that late. When I finally started walking again, I told myself it was just my ears playing tricks on me. The next morning, over breakfast in the crew galley, I asked a couple of the younger deckhands if they'd ever heard anything by the ballroom. One of them, a kid named Malik, raised his eyebrows. "Dude, you heard it too?" I thought I was losing it last trip. Around 3 in the morning, I swear I heard music, like some old record player. When I told security, they just laughed. That shook me a little. It wasn't just me. About 2 weeks after that, things escalated. A storm rolled in on the third night of a 5-day run. We were anchored near a small island because the waves were too rough to dock. Most passengers stayed in their rooms. I was doing my usual rounds around 2 in the morning, rain hammering the windows in the lower halls. When I got to the ballroom doors, the air felt heavier. That's the only way I can describe it. It was colder too, even though the rest of the corridor was stuffy. I was about to keep walking when I heard it, clear this time. Music, not muffled, not distant. It was soft and scratchy, like it was coming from an old gramophone. The tune was slow and elegant, but a little off somehow, like the record was warped. And then under the music came voices, laughter, the clink of glasses. I froze. I had my flashlight in one hand and my radio in the other, but I couldn't move. I remember leaning just a little closer to the seam of the door. I wanted to convince myself it was just air in the pipes or water rushing somewhere. Then something hit the door from the inside. It wasn't a tap. It was a single heavy thud, like someone slamming a fist against it. I stumbled back so fast I almost dropped the flashlight. The music and laughter stopped instantly. I radioed security, my voice shaking. Yeah, I think someone's in the locked ballroom." 2 guards showed up within 5 minutes. We stood there in that narrow corridor, the 3 of us waiting to hear it again. But there was nothing. One of the guards shrugged. "Probably just the storm. This section creaks sometimes. Don't let the stories get to you." But as we walked away, I swear I heard the faintest sound behind us. A slow dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. I tried to avoid that corridor for a while, swapping patrol routes with Jorge whenever I could. But one night, about a month later, I had no choice. Jorge was helping fix a pipe leak, and I had to go alone. I told myself I'd just walk past fast, not even look at the door. But as I approached, I noticed something new. Something had smeared what looked like damp handprints on the lower half of the metal strip that sealed the doors. They weren't clear enough to tell if they were real handprints, but there were 5 or 6 of them, smudged and streaked as if whoever left them had been dragging their hands downward. I stared at them for too long, my heart hammering in my chest. I even leaned closer to make sure it wasn't just rust. It wasn't. The marks were dark and wet, and then, in the silence of that corridor, I heard a voice. It was a whisper, right at my ear. "Come dance." I spun around so fast my flashlight clattered to the floor. The hallway was empty. I didn't wait. I ran all the way back to the crew lounge and sat there until Jorge came by. That was the last time I heard anything from the ballroom, at least while I was on shift. 2 weeks later, a passenger went missing during a stormy night. Security searched every deck, every room. They even brought in local authorities when we docked the next morning. They never found him. I overheard one of the officers mutter to another. His key card was last scanned on deck 3, near the old ballroom. Nobody said it out loud, but I could see it in their faces. I still work on that ship. I still pass that corridor sometimes. I never linger. The metal strip over the doors is still there, but it's warped now, like it's been pushed outward. Every so often, a passenger will ask why that beautiful old ballroom is sealed up. We just tell them it's unsafe, that the floor is rotted. That's true in a way. The floor probably is rotted, but sometimes late at night when the ocean's calm and the ship is quiet, I swear I hear it again. The faint sound of a waltz drifting through the steel, and I think about that whisper, and about the man who vanished. I've made myself a promise, no matter what I hear, I'm never going to stop in front of that door again, because some doors stay locked for a reason. And this version keeps the tone natural and unsettling, builds atmosphere gradually, uses believable characters, the narrator, Jorge, Malik the guard's missing passenger, and leaves the ending ambiguous and haunting. Just the kind of story that lingers in the listener's mind. I'm not really the type to post on Reddit, but this has been sitting in my head for over a year now. I can't stop replaying it in my mind, especially at night. Maybe writing it down will help me make sense of what happened. Last summer, my wife Hannah and I took a short cruise along the East Coast. It was supposed to be a stress relief trip. 4 nights, nothing fancy. We were both burned out from work and thought a quiet cruise would be the perfect break. We booked a budget cabin on deck 5, an inside room, meaning it didn't have a real window. Just a round decorative mirror that was framed to look like a porthole. I remember joking about it when we checked in. Hey, at least we can pretend we've got a view. We unpacked, grabbed dinner, then walked around the ship. The first night was uneventful. Just music in the lounge and a lot of retirees playing cards. The weird stuff started the next morning. The first reports. Was in line at the buffet when I overheard an older couple at the next table talking to a staff member. I swear there was a little girl staring at us through the window last night, the woman was saying. She was in a white dress right outside our cabin in the hallway. She just stood there for the longest time. But when my husband opened the door, she was gone. The staff member just nodded politely, said he'd mention it to security. I didn't think much of it at the time. I assumed they'd seen another passenger's kid or were maybe just overtired. Later that afternoon, Hannah came back from the gift shop looking a little pale. "You won't believe what I just heard," she said. "What?" "A lady by the elevator was telling someone about a little girl who keeps showing up at night, standing outside people's cabins, but deck 5 doesn't have windows in the hallway." That detail stuck with me. No windows. The hallway or cabin was about midway down a long, narrow corridor lined with identical doors. The carpet was deep blue with a pattern that always seemed to ripple in the dim light. The whole hallway had this muffled, hollow sound to it, like being inside a long pipe. Right across from our cabin door was that porthole mirror. It was just a circular mirror mounted on the wall, probably to make the narrow hallway feel less claustrophobic. That night, as we got ready for bed, I noticed Hannah staring at it. "You okay?" I asked. It looks like it should be a window," she said. "I keep thinking I'm going to see something in it." I laughed it off, but I admit, it did look strange. The glass was slightly convex, so it warped your reflection just a little. The first night around 2:30 a.m., I woke up to the sound of soft footsteps in the hallway. At first, I thought it was just a late-night wanderer or maybe a crew member doing rounds, but the footsteps stopped right outside our door. For a long moment, I just lay there, staring at the ceiling. I could hear my own heartbeat. Then Hannah whispered, "Do you hear that?" The footsteps didn't move. I got up as quietly as I could and peered through the peephole. Nothing. Just the dimly lit hallway and that round mirror across from us. But as I leaned in, I swear I saw movement in the mirror, like a small figure, standing too far back to be me. I opened the door fast. The hallway was empty. More sightings. The next day at breakfast, there was a definite buzz among the passengers. A couple in their 40s claimed they saw a little girl late at night, standing in front of that same mirror outside their cabin. They said she looked about 7 or 8 with long, dark hair and a pale dress. Every time someone went to check, she vanished. That afternoon, I spoke to one of the housekeeping staff, a young guy named Mateo. He looked uneasy when I brought it up. "You've seen her too?" he asked. "Not exactly," I admitted, "just something in the mirror." He nodded. "Crew talk about her sometimes, always in that hallway, but we don't like to discuss it." When I pressed, he just shook his head and muttered something about old stories and walked away. The second night that night, Hannah insisted on leaving the bathroom light on. We both tried to brush it off, but neither of us slept well. Sometime after midnight, I woke up again, not from a sound, but from this heavy feeling that someone was right outside. I got up, as quietly as I could, and crept to the door. This time I didn't look through the peephole. I just listened. Nothing. I was about to go back to bed when I noticed a dim glow on the wall opposite our door. The hallway light was reflecting faintly off the mirror, but the reflection was wrong. I couldn't make out details, just the outline of someone small, standing perfectly still. I froze. My hand was on the doorknob, but I couldn't bring myself to open it. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the shape tilted its head and slipped out of view, as if it had stepped to the side. Talking to the staff the next morning, I went straight to the guest services desk. The woman there smiled politely as I told her what had been happening. But when I mentioned the mirror, her expression shifted slightly, just for a moment. "We haven't had any incidents reported by our staff," she said. "Sometimes guests imagine things when they're tired or adjusting to the motion of the ship." It was the way she said it that made me feel like she'd heard this before. I asked if anyone had ever died on the ship. She brushed it off, said nothing unusual had happened. But I could tell she wasn't being completely honest. The third night, Hannah was seriously considering asking for a room change. But the ship was full and there weren't any other cabins available. We went to bed early, hoping to sleep through whatever was happening. Around 3 a.m., a sharp thunk woke us both. It sounded like something had tapped. No. Knocked on the door. Hannah grabbed my arm. "Don't," she whispered as I reached for the handle. I looked through the peephole. Nothing. I waited a long time, but eventually I opened the door. The hallway was empty, except for the mirror. This time, I walked right up to it. My own reflection looked pale and tense in the dim light. But as I leaned closer, I noticed something behind me, in the reflection. A little girl. She was standing in the middle of the hallway a few feet behind me. Her face was turned toward me, but her eyes looked like hollow shadows. I spun around. No one there. When I turned back to the mirror, the reflection was empty again. The final night. We didn't sleep. We stayed sitting on the bed, the bathroom light still on, waiting for morning. Around 4 a.m., there was a commotion in the hallway, hurried footsteps, raised voices. A crew member was escorting a young couple down the hall. The woman was crying. The man kept glancing back over his shoulder. I stepped out and caught Mateo as he passed. "What happened?" I asked. He hesitated, then said quietly, "They saw her." The girl, right outside their door, said she was looking in at them through the window. I just stared at him. There aren't any windows. Mateo looked at the mirror across the hall and said nothing. After we got home, the rest of the trip passed without incident. We didn't see her again, but I can't stop thinking about the way the girl looked in that mirror. The way her head tilted slightly like she was curious. I've done some digging since then. That ship had changed ownership several times. I found an old news clipping about a young girl who'd gone missing during a cruise in the late 90s. Her cabin had been on deck 5. Her body was never found. I don't know if it was her. I don't know what we saw, but sometimes late at night, I'll catch my own reflection in a window or a mirror, and for just a second, I'll see the faint outline of someone small standing just behind me. Even now, I can't stand to look too long at any round mirrors, because I know what I saw that night wasn't my imagination, and I'm terrified that someday I'll see her again. Not in the reflection, but standing there in the room with me. I've worked as a radio officer on cargo ships for almost 12 years. I've heard my share of strange chatter on the open sea. Phantom voices, garbled transmissions from fishing boats, the occasional hoax. But nothing has ever stayed with me the way the incident on the MV Calypso did. It happened 5 years ago, in the South Pacific, during the tail end of typhoon season. I'm telling this now because I still don't know what we picked up that night. And sometimes I wonder if speaking it out loud might help me sleep. The hook, a storm and a signal. We were 3 days out from Manila, heading toward Los Angeles with a hold full of automotive parts. The Calypso was an older bulk carrier, creaky steel decks, humming fluorescent lights, and a radio room that smelled faintly of rust and cigarette smoke. The weather had been turning for hours. By sunset, the sky was an ugly bruise purple, and the sea was heaving like something alive. We'd battened down the deck hatches and cut our speed to ride the storm more safely. That night I was on the midnight to 4 watch in the radio room. The bridge was manned by Captain Harris, a calm older man with decades at sea, and First Officer Yates, a practical by-the-book type. Down in the engine room was Luis, our chief engineer, a superstitious Filipino who always muttered prayers when the weather got bad. The wind had a low, whistling tone in the wires outside. I had the shortwave on, mostly for weather reports. That's when I heard it. A burst of Morse code, faint but clear. Not some random fishing boat chatter, an actual old-fashioned SOS, and I froze. In my time at sea, no one uses straight Morse for emergencies anymore. But I recognized it instantly. My headphones crackled with static and then silence. I checked the display to confirm the signal's direction. It said it came from our own coordinates. The build-up. No ship in sight, I called the bridge. Captain, I just picked up a distress signal, old-style SOS. It's pinging right on top of us. There was a pause. Repeat that, Henry, Captain Harris said, sounding irritated more than worried. I repeated it. Yates got on the line, telling me to verify. I tried hailing on VHF channel 16, the standard emergency frequency. Vessel sending SOS, this is cargo ship Calypso. Identify yourself, static. No reply. I checked the radar feed. There was nothing but the storm around us. No ship, no lifeboat, not even a blip of debris. When I switched back to the shortwave, the signal burst out again. Just the SOS, over and over like a desperate heartbeat. I tried transmitting back in Morse. As soon as I did, the signal stopped, cut off mid-sequence. I remember sitting there with the hairs rising on my arms. I thought maybe it was just atmospheric interference, some kind of bounce from a distant source. But the fact that it stopped as soon as I replied, that felt deliberate. Tension on board Captain Harris came down to the radio room around 1 a.m., rainwater dripping from his jacket. You sure about this, Henry? Yes, sir. It's not a glitch. I've heard it twice now. Yates came in right behind him, glancing at the radar on the wall. We've got nothing within 10 miles. Nothing on AIS either. And nobody's sending distress calls these days in Morse. Luis, the chief engineer, stuck his head in and muttered, Maybe it's not people. Harris shot him a look. We're not doing ghost stories tonight. Still, I could tell the captain wasn't as dismissive as he sounded. The ocean at night during a storm is the loneliest place on Earth. Hearing a call for help and not finding a source, it gets under your skin. We decided to keep the bridge crew extra alert and stay on course until daylight. But I kept the headphones on, scanning. The third call at around 2:30 a.m., just when I thought it might be over, the signal came again. This time it wasn't just SOS. There was another string, fainter, slower, almost hesitant. I scrambled for my notepad and jotted down the dots and dashes. It spelled CALLFORHELP. I responded again. Identify vessel. Coordinates. The transmission cut off mid-word, same as before. A minute later, the wind outside roared louder, and the ship lurched to starboard as if struck by a wave bigger than the rest. I nearly fell out of my chair. Harris's voice barked over the intercom, telling everyone to brace. I swear I heard something in the momentary gap in the storm's howl, a sound like a distant horn, mournful and low. It faded before I could be sure. The watch at dawn. By dawn, the storm had eased into a churning drizzle. The sea was slate gray and endless. We scanned the horizon for wreckage, rafts, containers, even a bit of driftwood. Nothing. Luis came up from below, looking pale. Engines running hot, he said. Like something's dragging us. Yates dismissed it as the weather. But I saw the captain glance at me as if to ask whether I'd heard anything more. I hadn't. The radio was silent. For the rest of that day, the crew went about their routines, but there was a tension you could feel. Nobody wanted to say it out loud, but we were all waiting for the call to come again, the climax. The fourth signal it came that night. Just before midnight, I was in the radio room alone again. The storm had mostly passed, leaving the sea eerily calm, the kind of glassy black that swallows the sky. The signal began as a faint SOS, then shifted into a slow, halting message. The dashes were long, like the sender was struggling. I wrote it down as it came in. When I finished, I felt my stomach drop. It said, BELOWYOU, FORGOD, Nessa SAKELISTEN. BELOW. I grabbed the bridge phone, my hand shaking. Captain, we're getting another message. It says, I stopped, realizing how insane it sounded. He came down within a minute, Yates right behind him. I showed them the notes. Yates frowned. Below us? That makes no sense. There's no... Before he finished, the Calypso shuddered, not from a wave, but from something else, like a deep thump against the hull. We all felt it through the floor. For the next few seconds, the signal kept repeating the last word. BELOW. BELOW. And then it died. We ran up to the deck. The sea was calm, black, and infinite. The ship's floodlights picked up nothing but the silver spray of waves. No sign of anything that could have struck us. Louis swore he heard another low horn somewhere in the distance, but the rest of us heard only the creak of the ship's own steel. The haunting resolution. We never heard the signal again after that night. No ships were reported missing in that area. No wreckage was found. When we finally docked in Los Angeles, I submitted a full incident report. The Coast Guard noted the log but found nothing on record. No distress calls, no nearby vessels. The official explanation was radio interference combined with storm-related stress. That's what went into the books, but I can't shake the feeling that there was something down there. Something old, maybe, that still knows the language of dots and dashes. Something trying desperately to warn us. Sometimes when I can't sleep, I still hear it in my head. The faint, deliberate "Bene," followed by that final word, stretched out across the static. BELOW. That's my story. Believe it or not, that's up to you. But I'll tell you this. I've worked 5 more years at sea since then, and I've never again switched on the shortwave during a stormy night. Not ever. I've never been one to believe in ghost stories or strange sea legends. I'm a pretty down-to-earth guy. But something happened on a cruise I worked on in 2018 that still keeps me awake some nights. I was 26 back then, working as a junior steward on the Ocean Star, a mid-sized cruise ship that ran routes from Miami to the Caribbean. It wasn't some massive, flashy floating city, more like a classic liner that had been modernized just enough to stay in business. I'd taken the job to save money and see a bit of the world, but I wasn't prepared for the night we lost those 2 passengers. Hook. Introduction. It was the 3rd night of a 7-day cruise. We were docked at no port, just out in the open sea about 200 miles east of Florida. It was a clear night, calm water, soft wind, the ship humming as usual. That evening, the captain hosted his traditional captain's dinner, a formal event in the main dining hall where passengers dressed up and got their pictures taken. I was assigned to the portside section, serving drinks and clearing dishes. It was usually one of the easier nights because everyone was on their best behavior, not like the rowdier pool deck events. I remember seeing them, the couple who would later vanish. The man was in his early 30s, tall, neatly dressed in a dark blue suit. The woman was maybe a year or 2 younger, in a soft green dress that stood out in the candlelight. They looked like the kind of couple you'd see in an ad for the cruise, happy, relaxed, leaning into each other when they spoke. I noticed them because they asked me to take their photo with their own camera instead of using the ship's photographer. Just one for us, the woman said with a small smile. They had no idea I'd be the last crew member to really interact with them, build up around. Halfway through dinner, there was some light piano music and the captain gave his usual toast. The couple laughed, clinked glasses. I remember seeing them dance for a bit near the small space cleared by the band. Then maybe a little after 9, they got up together and quietly slipped out of the dining hall. That wasn't unusual. People left early all the time. But I do recall watching them go because the woman looked back at the room for a second, like she'd forgotten something. Then she shook her head and followed her partner out. I thought nothing of it at the time. The rest of the dinner went as usual. We wrapped up around 10:30, and I stayed behind helping clear the tables. After my shift, I went down to the crew quarters, changed, and grabbed a late snack from the staff mess. I didn't hear anything strange that night. It wasn't until the next afternoon that things started to feel off. A passenger, a middle-aged woman from cabin 612, stopped me in the hallway. "Excuse me," she said, a little hesitant. "Do you know if the couple in 534 got off at the last port?" I told her we hadn't docked anywhere since the previous morning and no one had disembarked. "That's strange," she said. "I haven't seen them since the captain's dinner. They were at our table, but they never came back last night. I knocked this morning and no answer." I assured her they were probably just enjoying themselves somewhere on the ship. But something in her tone made me uneasy. Later that evening, I mentioned it to my supervisor. He frowned and said, "I'll have security check their cabin." Security checked. No answer at the door. They used the master key and found the cabin empty. What made it eerie was how untouched the room looked. The bed was neatly made, exactly the way housekeeping would have left it. Their luggage was there. 2 half-packed suitcases, the woman's makeup bag on the little desk. Their passports were inside the desk drawer, and their cabin key card was still in the holder by the door. It didn't look like they had stepped out for a walk. It looked like they had never come back after dinner. The ship's quiet search, the ship's staff handled it discreetly at first. Missing passengers weren't unheard of. Sometimes people stayed up late partying in other cabins, or overslept in a friend's room. But by the next morning, the captain quietly ordered a full search of all public areas and storage rooms. The ship wasn't huge, but there were a lot of places to check. Kitchens, crew areas, lifeboat decks, even the medical bay. No one had seen them. Not a single bartender, steward, or passenger remembered seeing them after they walked out of the dining hall. CCTV footage only made the situation creepier. We watched the recording from the dining hall. There they were, leaving together at 9:07 p.m. They turned left into the main corridor. The next camera in that corridor should have caught them passing by, but it didn't. We checked the footage from both directions, all the way to the elevators and staircases. Nothing. It was like they had stepped out of the dining hall and just stopped existing. The rumors by day 4, word had gotten out. You can't keep something like that a secret on a ship with 1,200 passengers. I overheard people whispering in the buffet line. Some said the couple had run away together and would sue the cruise line for publicity. Others said they'd fallen overboard. But that didn't explain why no one saw them on deck or heard a splash. A few of the older crew whispered the kind of stories you hear if you work at sea long enough, about thin places out on the water, where sometimes people just don't come back. I'd always rolled my eyes at those stories. Not anymore. My experience that night, after the captain made an announcement asking passengers to report any information, I was assigned to check the midship service decks. These were the narrow, poorly lit maintenance corridors that ran behind the main hallways. They smelled of oil and damp cardboard. I was walking past a row of storage lockers when I thought I heard something. A soft, distant laugh. It wasn't the kind of laugh you hear at a party. It was quiet, almost like someone trying not to be heard. I turned around fast, but the corridor was empty. A second later, the overhead light near the end of the hallway flickered, then steadied again. I told myself I was just on edge. But as I passed one of the locker doors, I swear I felt a sudden cold draft against my arm. There's no wind in those service corridors. I left that area a little quicker than I probably should have. Climax, the last sighting on the 5th night. One of the bartenders swore. She saw the couple. She said she was closing up the small lounge near the stern when she noticed 2 people sitting side by side on the far side of the glass doors that led to the outside deck. The lights out there were dimmed, but she said it looked like a man in a dark suit and a woman in a pale green dress. She called out to them, "Sorry folks, we're closed." But they didn't move. She thought they hadn't heard her, so she went to the doors to tell them again. When she stepped outside, the deck was empty. There was no way they could have slipped past her without opening the doors. When she told security, I saw the look on her face, pale, shaky, like she genuinely believed what she'd seen. The next morning, we reached Nassau the next day. Local authorities came aboard, and a full sweep was done before anyone was allowed off the ship. Divers checked the surrounding waters. No sign of the couple. Their belongings were handed over to the police. The rest of the cruise limped to an awkward finish. Passengers avoided the empty table at the dining hall. Crew members stopped joking in the staff mess. The ship felt heavier somehow, like the air itself had changed. Resolution ending. It's been years, and I still think about them. Every few months I check online to see if there's been an update. If maybe they were found somewhere, alive with some wild story about getting lost at sea. But there's never been a single credible lead. I still remember the way the woman looked back at the dining hall just before she left. At the time it was nothing, just a glance over her shoulder. But now I wonder if she felt it too. Like she knew somehow that once they walked out that door they weren't coming back. Some nights, I dream I'm back on that ship. I'm walking down the quiet corridor behind the dining hall. I hear that faint laugh again, and in the dream I know if I turn around fast enough, I'll see them standing there. I never turn around even now when I'm on dry land. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night convinced I can hear the low, distant hum of the ship's engines, and the faint sound of someone laughing just beyond the door. I've worked as a night janitor for almost 12 years. I've cleaned everything from greasy fast food kitchens to empty hospitals, but nothing ever gave me the same feeling as the observation deck at Brighton Point. The deck sits at the end of the old pier that stretches a good half-mile into the Atlantic. By day, it's crowded with tourists taking pictures of the water and watching for whales. At night, though, it's a hollow glass room surrounded by dark ocean. The only sound is the waves and the groan of the wood beneath you. I hated working that shift, but the pay was better for nights and I needed it. It was in late November, one of those weeks when the sky is just a solid slab of gray and the air tastes like salt and rain. The tourist season was over. The pier was nearly empty, and on most nights it felt like I was the only one alive out there. That night started like every other. I got to the deck around 11:30 p.m., pushing my cart full of cleaning supplies through the wind. The deck itself is enclosed with thick glass walls that go all the way around, so even when you're inside, you can see the black water stretching forever. I always felt like I was being watched when I worked there, like something was floating out on the ocean staring back. I remember glancing at my watch. 12:07 a.m. I had about an hour of mopping, wiping down benches, and sweeping the sand that always found its way in. I was halfway through scrubbing the glass near the far corner when I noticed something. A boy. He was sitting on the floor by the glass, his knees pulled up to his chest, his face turned toward the water. He couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old. His clothes looked dated, a dark wool sweater and little brown shoes, the kind kids wore in old photographs. For a second I thought maybe some tourist kid had gotten locked in when the place closed. I set my rag down and said, "Hey buddy, you okay?" He didn't respond. He just raised his right arm and slowly pointed out toward the ocean. That's when a little ripple of unease went through me. The water out there was black, shifting under the moonlight, but I didn't see anything. No boats, no boys, nothing. I started walking toward him. The floor creaked under my boots. The whole time he didn't look at me, just kept pointing. I was about 10 feet away when I blinked and he was gone. The spot where he'd been sitting was empty. I froze. My first thought was that he'd darted behind one of the benches, so I quickly walked around the deck, checking every corner. There was no sign of him. The only sound was the distant crash of waves. Then it hit me. The doors. I'd locked them behind me when I came in, like I always do. There was no way anyone could have come in or out without me hearing the latch. I told myself I was just tired. Maybe I'd seen the reflection of my own cleaning rag or the shape of the moon on the glass, but that explanation felt thin. My hands wouldn't stop trembling as I went back to scrubbing. Every few minutes I'd glance back at that spot by the glass. I didn't see the boy again that night, but I couldn't shake the image, him sitting there pointing. The next evening I went back. I'd almost convinced myself it had been a trick of the light, until I noticed something on the glass where the boy had been sitting. Tiny, smudged fingerprints. They were too small to be an adult's. They trailed down the pane as if someone had rested their hand against it while staring outside. I tried to wipe them away, but they didn't come off easily. The prints almost seemed baked into the glass like they'd been there for years. That night I kept the radio on low just to hear another human voice. Around 1 a.m., while I was wiping down the benches, I caught movement in the glass. It was a reflection, the boy again, sitting in the same spot, pointing. I spun around so fast I nearly dropped the rag, but the space behind me was empty. When I looked back at the glass, there was nothing there either. I didn't even finish the shift. I packed up my stuff and left, telling myself I'd make up an excuse to my supervisor. A couple of days later, I told my friend Marcus, one of the security guards who sometimes did rounds on the pier, about what I'd seen. I expected him to laugh, but instead he got quiet. "Where exactly did you see the kid?" he asked. "By the northeast panel, facing the water." Marcus let out a slow breath. "You ever hear about the ferry disaster?" I shook my head. "Late 60s, he said. A school trip. Ferry capsized just off the pier in rough water. A lot of kids didn't make it. Locals say some of them still show up around the point, especially in winter." I stared at him, not sure if he was messing with me, but his face was serious. That night I almost didn't go in, but I needed the money, and I told myself stories like that always grow bigger over the years. People love ghost stories. I got there early and made sure all the lights were on. The deck felt almost normal in the bright glow, but as the night went on, the wind picked up and the building creaked. The ocean was a dark sheet of restless silver. At about 12:40 a.m. I heard it, a soft tapping, like small knuckles rapping gently on the glass. It came from the far side of the deck. I stood still, my mop handle tight in my hands. The tapping came again, slightly louder. I stepped closer and froze. On the other side of the glass, barely visible in the dark, was the pale face of a boy. He wasn't quite pressed against the glass, but close enough that I could see the shadows where his eyes should have been, and he was smiling. Then, like before, he raised his arm and pointed out to sea. I blinked. He was gone. Don't remember running, but I remember the sound of my boots on the pier, the way the wind stung my face as I sprinted all the way back to the main building. I called Marcus, told him I was done with night shifts at the deck. He didn't argue. A few days later, though, I went back one last time during the day. The deck looked so harmless in the sunlight, with tourists leaning on the railings and kids laughing. But I walked over to that same spot by the glass. The fingerprints were still there, even after all my scrubbing. It's been 6 months since I quit that job. I live inland now, far from the ocean. But sometimes late at night, I swear I can hear that soft tapping sound against my apartment window. And sometimes I wake up to find a tiny wet handprint on the glass. Always facing the water. Always pointing. I'm not usually the kind of guy who writes online about spooky experiences. I'm a retired Navy electrician, 58 years old, the kind of person who used to laugh at ghost stories. But this one, I still get goosebumps thinking about it. It happened last spring on a 5-night cruise I took with my wife, Denise. We weren't really cruise people, but our daughter bought us the tickets as a retirement gift. The ship was massive, practically a floating hotel with over a dozen decks and hundreds of cabins. We were assigned to cabin 726 on deck 7. Nothing fancy, just a standard inside cabin, no windows. The first 2 nights were normal. We spent the days exploring the ship, eating way too much at the buffet, watching shows at night. We slept fine. I remember joking that the rocking of the ship made me sleep like a baby. The 3rd night is when things started to get weird. The first knock it was around 2 a.m. I woke up because I thought I heard something and a sharp, deliberate knock on our cabin door. I sat up thinking maybe it was a crew member or maybe some drunk passenger got the wrong room. Denise stirred and mumbled, "Who's that?" I slipped out of bed and went to the door. We had one of those little peepholes and I looked out. The hallway was empty, brightly lit, silent. I stood there for a good minute, then shrugged and went back to bed. 5 minutes later, it happened again. Knock. Same rhythm. Not frantic, not playful, just steady. This time I yanked the door open immediately. Nothing. Not a soul in sight. Weird, sure, but I figured it was just some kid playing a prank. We were both tired and went back to sleep. The complaint the next morning at breakfast, we mentioned it to a guy we'd met on board. Rick, a tall, friendly guy in his 40s who was traveling alone. When I told him about the knocking, he froze. "You're in 726? He asked. I nodded. Rick glanced around as if to make sure no one was listening. I was in that cabin last year. Moved after the second night. Same thing happened to me. Around 2 a.m. someone knocked, but nobody was ever there. I laughed it off, but Denise looked uneasy. "You're serious?" she asked. Rick nodded. Serious enough that I demanded a new cabin. The crew wouldn't tell me much, but one guy hinted that other passengers had complained about the same thing. I chalked it up to a coincidence. Big ship, lots of people. Maybe some joker was having fun creeping folks out. Still, Denise asked me to report it to security. I did. The officer at the desk was polite, said they'd send someone to patrol the hallway that night. Security gets involved that night. We went to bed early after a show. I remember feeling a little foolish for worrying about a knock on the door. Around 1:45 a.m. there was a soft knock on our cabin door, just one tap. I got up and opened it. A uniformed security officer stood there. He introduced himself as Officer Morales and explained that he and his partner would be stationed down the hall all night. "Just in case," he said, smiling. I thanked him and went back to bed feeling reassured. For a while all was quiet. The hum of the ship's engines and the gentle sway of the cabin made me start to drift off. Then, at exactly 2:03 a.m., it came again. Knock, knock, knock. This time, I heard Morales call out from the hallway. "Who's there?" No answer. A few seconds later, another knock, louder, more deliberate, rattled our cabin door. I jumped out of bed and opened it. Morales and his partner were standing just a few feet away, looking confused. "We didn't see anyone," Morales said, "but we definitely heard it." Denise was sitting up in bed, pale and wide-eyed. I asked Morales if he thought it was a prank. He didn't answer right away, just glanced at the door as if sizing it up. Then he did something that still makes my stomach turn. He lifted his fist and knocked on the cabin door himself. Knock, knock, knock. For a few seconds, nothing happened. And then, from our side of the door, 3 slow knocks came back. Knock, knock, knock. I swear to God, it was like the door itself was answering. Morales jumped back, eyes wide. His partner muttered something in Spanish and crossed himself. I slammed the door shut. The long night, we didn't sleep the rest of that night. Morales stayed outside our cabin until dawn, but nothing else happened after that knock. The next morning, we asked to change cabins. The receptionist at guest services didn't look surprised. She just said, "Let me see what I can do." They moved us 2 decks up. I figured that was the end of it, but Rick found us later that day by the pool. "They moved you, didn't they?" he asked. I nodded. Smart. Some cabins on these ships, they just have bad history. I asked him what he meant, but he wouldn't elaborate. The passenger who never left on the last day of the cruise. We overheard 2 crew members talking near the buffet. They didn't notice us. One of them, a younger guy with a mop, said something like, "I hate cleaning that hallway. Gives me the creeps. That old lady who died in her sleep a few years ago. You know she was in 726, right?" The other crew member shushed him, but it was too late. Denise and I exchanged a look. Later, I tried to ask at the front desk if there'd been a death in that cabin, but the clerk just smiled politely and said, "I'm sorry, sir. We don't disclose that information." The last night, our new cabin was quiet the next few nights until the final one. We were packing our bags, getting ready for disembarkation the next morning. I remember feeling relieved that we'd had no further disturbances. Then, sometime past midnight as I was dozing off, I thought I heard it again. Not at our door this time. Somewhere down the hall, knock, knock, knock. I held my breath. It came again, a little fainter. I crept to the door and peeked out. The hallway was empty. But far down the corridor, near the bend, the direction of our old cabin, I saw a cabin door slowly close, as if someone had just stepped inside. I couldn't sleep after that. Aftermath: when we got home, Denise refused to talk about it. I went online, curious if anyone else had experienced something similar. That's when I found threads on cruise forums and even a post on our No Sleep from years back, describing almost the exact same thing. Knocking at 2 a.m., always on deck 7, near cabin 726. Some say it's the spirit of that old woman, confused and still wandering. Others say it's something older, something tied to the ship itself. All I know is that when Morales knocked on that door and it knocked back, I stopped being a skeptic. We haven't taken another cruise since. To anyone reading this, if you ever find yourself booking a cabin on a cruise ship and they give you 726 or anything near it, ask for a different room. Just trust me. You don't want to be there when the knocking starts. I've worked as a night operator on the Lakeview Ferry for almost 6 years. If you've never taken the ferry, imagine an old steel-bodied vessel with peeling white paint and a faint smell of diesel and lake water that clings to your clothes. It makes 3 round trips across Lake Merritt every night, mostly carrying truckers and a few late-night travelers. The schedule is predictable. The nights are usually quiet. That's why the call from Cabin 9B still haunts me. It happened on a fog-heavy October night, the kind where the water and sky look like the same dark sheet. The air was damp, cold enough to bite through my jacket. The ferry was halfway across the lake, engines humming low, the deck lights throwing pale yellow pools over the metal floor. I was in the operator's room, a cramped space with a panel of switches, a wall-mounted radio and the old landline phone that connects to the cabins. It was 1:23 a.m. when the phone rang. The sound made me flinch. It always did. On night shifts, every little sound feels louder. I picked up and said, "Operator, this is Mason. What's the issue?" At first, I only heard static. Thin, whispering static like wind over a microphone. Then a shaky voice came through. It was a man, his words stumbling over each other. "Please, you need to send someone. It's in here. Cabin 9B, please hurry." I froze. Cabin 9B. That cabin had been locked and sealed for over 5 years. Everyone on the ferry knew why. 5 years ago, a young couple, tourists, had booked 9B for an overnight trip across the lake. Sometime during the night, other passengers reported hearing screaming and loud banging from their cabin. When crew members finally forced the door open the next morning, they found both of them dead. No clear explanation, no signs of anyone else in the room. The details were kept quiet, but whispers spread. Scratches on the walls, their faces twisted in terror. After that, the ferry company sealed 9B. The door was bolted shut, the windows boarded over. No one was allowed inside, so hearing a live voice call from that cabin made my skin crawl. "Who is this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Cabin 9B isn't in use." "Are you a passenger?" The man's breathing came fast and wet through the line. I can't see it anymore, but it's in the dark. Don't let it knock again, please." Then there was a sharp click and the line went dead. I just sat there staring at the phone like it might ring again. I could hear the low thrum of the ferry's engine, the distant slap of water against the hull. I told myself it was a prank. Maybe some drunk passenger had found a way to reach the operator's line. But the way his voice cracked when he said, "Don't let it knock again," that didn't sound like a prank. I decided to tell the deck supervisor, Joe. Joe was in his mid-40s, ex-Coast Guard, the kind of guy who always acted like nothing could rattle him. When I told him about the call, his face stayed neutral, but I saw his eyes narrow a bit. "Stay put," he said. "I'll go check the cabin." I offered to go with him, but he shook his head. "No point both of us going. Keep the line open in case it calls again." I watched him leave, his boots clanging against the metal floor as he headed toward the lower deck. The next 10 minutes felt like an hour. The fog outside thickened, pressing against the windows of the operator's room. I kept glancing at the phone, half hoping it would stay silent, half dreading that it wouldn't. Then faintly, through the floor beneath me, I heard it. 3 slow knocks. Knock. 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 The sound came from below, from the direction of cabin 9B. I held my breath, straining to hear more. Nothing. Just silence after the knocks. A few minutes later, Joe came back. His face was a little pale. He shut the door behind him before speaking. "No one's in there," he said. "The door's still sealed. Lock's intact. Windows boarded. It's exactly how it's been." I asked if he was sure, and he nodded. "I even checked the hallway cameras, nothing. You must have gotten a prank call patched through somehow." I wanted to believe him, but my gut didn't. The rest of the trip was uneventful. No more calls. No more knocks. We docked at the far side of the lake at 2:15 a.m. I stayed until my shift ended at dawn, unable to shake the feeling that I'd heard a real person begging for help. The next night, the ferry was back on schedule. Same thick fog, same creaking metal, same dim yellow lights. I tried to convince myself the whole thing had been a weird dream from sleep deprivation. But at almost the exact same time, 1:23 a.m., the phone rang again. I picked it up, my mouth dry. "Mason?" The voice was the same man's, softer this time. hoarse like he'd been whispering for hours. "You didn't help me." A shiver ran down my arms. "Who are you? Where are you?" "I don't know," he said. "It's dark. It keeps knocking. Don't let it in, please. Don't let it knock again." Then the line went dead. I felt like my blood had gone cold. I turned to grab the intercom to call Joe, but before I could, the knocks came again. This time louder, faster. Knock, knock, knock. Not from the cabin below. From the hallway just outside the operator's room. I froze, staring at the thin metal door. My mind raced. No one had been in the hallway when I'd started my shift. "I hadn't heard any footsteps, Joe," I called out. My voice came out shakier than I wanted. No reply. Another 3 knocks. Same slow rhythm. I stood up, unsure whether to open the door or barricade it. Then just as suddenly as it started, the knocking stopped. Joe arrived about a minute later looking irritated. "What's wrong?" he asked. I told him about the call, about the knocking outside the door. He didn't smile this time. He didn't say it was a prank either. He just stared at me for a long moment before saying, "Keep the line open. If it calls again, don't say a word. Just listen." The rest of that night passed in tense silence. No more calls. No more knocks. I thought it was over. The following evening, as we were getting ready to board passengers, one of the maintenance guys came up to me. He looked uneasy. "You've been working nights, right?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. He hesitated, then said, "We found something on the door of 9B. Scratches, fresh ones, like someone was clawing at it from the inside." I didn't know what to say. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the voice on the phone, the way it had begged, the way it had said, "Don't let it knock again." It's been 3 weeks since then. I asked to switch to day shifts, and luckily they let me. But I still hear it sometimes, soft, distant knocks in the back of my mind like an echo that won't fade. The strangest part? Cabin 9B is still sealed. I've checked the logs myself. No one has entered that room in 5 years. But every night, just after 1:23 a.m., the phone on the operator's desk rings once. And even though I'm not there anymore, I know whoever picks it up will hear that same hoarse voice whispering from the dark, "Please, don't let it knock again."